What is going on, chess YouTube? So in today's video, we are looking at one of Gukesh D's latest and greatest games. This one is Gukesh versus Alireza Firouzja from the 2024 Zagreb Superbet United Blitz Tournament. And here we go. In the game, Gukesh is playing as white. In the game, he opens 1, knight f3, the ready opening, and Alireza, how does he respond? Well, he goes 1 c5. Now we have g3, knight c6, bishop g2, and now part of the idea of going for an immediate c5 and knight c6 is maybe you do want to threaten e5, heading for sort of a reversed King's Indian setup where white is playing as black and black is playing as white. But instead here, Alireza, he does just go g6, heading for more of a symmetrical English sort of structure. All right, now here, Gukesh, short castles, then bishop g7, and now sure enough, c4, we do transpose back to a symmetrical English. It's as if both sides open 1 c4, then 1 c5. Now here, Alireza, how does he want to respond? Well, he can go knight f6, then after, say, knight c3 and short castles, we would get a very symmetrical looking position, but instead here, he does break the symmetry with the move d6. Now, this move can transpose back to more normal territory. For example, black can go knight f6, then short castles, but this move d6 also has some other ideas. Black may also want to go for a fast bishop f5 or bishop g4, then queen d7, and apply pressure on this diagonal, potentially threatening moves like bishop h3 and so on. Now here, Gukesh, how does he respond? He just goes knight to c3, and now here in this position, Alireza, he has a million different ideas. For example, again, you can go knight f6, intending short castles, but beyond that, you can go e6, intending knight g to e7, you can go knight h6, and beyond that, moves like bishop f5 and bishop g4 are also playable. Now, in the game, he does go bishop f5, showing his hand a little bit, and the only reason you would really want to play this move here is if you did want to go queen d7 and then bishop h3. There's simply no other good reason to play that move. I mean, in addition to the fact that that bishop is now vulnerable to an e4 advance by white. All right, now here, Gukesh, in this position, if he wants to stop that bishop h3 idea, he has to go h3 himself, the point being after queen d7, then you can go king to h2, guarding that h3 square. The pawn is defended, and more importantly, that square in general is defended twice by the bishop and the king. Therefore, bishop h3 would not be a possibility. However, instead here, he does go d3. This move is quite a bit slower. It wasn't really that necessary. And now here, Alireza, he just goes queen d7, showing his idea, again intending bishop h3, and now there is no time for h3, then king h2, as obviously that would lose a pawn on the spot. That would be no bueno, my amigos. Now here, Gukesh, in this position, he continues bishop e3, perhaps intending a very similar plan as black with queen d2, and then bishop h6 if the moment arises. And now Alireza bishop h3, trading off that very important light squared bishop. All right, now here, in this position, what should Gukesh be doing? Well, it's not so easy to find a good plan. To be honest here, Alireza, he basically has already equalized in this game. It's only move 8 or move 9. And again, Alireza already doing fantastic as black. Now, of course, white does have some ideas. For example, you can trade on h3, trying to deflect the queen all the way over to the king side, away from the center. Beyond that, you can also break in the center with the move d4, maybe go rook b1, intending a3 and b4, or go queen d2, again intending bishop h6 if black does go knight to f6. Now, in the game, Gukesh being a very active player, he does break in the center. He goes d4, opening up the center, a perfectly fine choice. And now here, black does trade on g2. Bishop takes and king takes, and now we have c takes d4 and knight takes d4. So now the center is opening up. Of course, black does have that very important dark square bishop on the long diagonal. Overall, he's doing just fine, but Gukesh, he may be able to make something out of this position. All right, now here, Alireza, if he wants to play as aggressively as possible, the move you want to play here as black would be h5, the alpha 0 move, my personal favorite move as black on the chessboard, but instead, he does just go knight to f6, playing it safe in this blitz game against the new world champion, just intending, perhaps, short castles on the next move. All right, now here, Gukesh, how does he want to respond? Well, the computer says the way to go here as white, and this is not a very appetizing, series of moves, you want to just play it safe, retreat the knight, and if black harasses your bishop, say, knight g4, then you just go back once again. So overall, you're playing kind of a passive game, starting with the move knight f3, but that is not very fun. Gukesh is an aggressive attacking player. He wouldn't do that. So instead, he plays the move f3, basically committing his knight to being on d4. There is no good knight f3 retreat move, And the idea being, you don't have your light square bishop anymore. So for that reason, you are putting more of your pawns on these light squares, trying to increase your control over that light square complex. And maybe white wants to go e4 later in the game, trying to gain a little more control of the center of the board. Not a bad idea. But here, Alireza, he finds the flaw with the strategy immediately. And yes, that's right. It is time to push the alpha 0 h-pawn down the board. h5 is the move for Alireza, threatening h4. And because he has not castled his king is still stuck on e8. And that means the rook is still on h8, supporting the alpha 0 pawn. This could get very dangerous if black gets to move h4 in on the next move. So with that in mind here, Gukesh, he has simply no choice but to block the alpha 0 pawn with the alpha 0 pawn of his own. h4 is the move, blocking the h4 advance. But of course, this move does weaken the king side quite a bit, especially in conjunction with that move f3 played just on the move prior. All right, here, Alireza, he continues, rook c8, getting his rook to the semi-open c file. Now b3 for Gukesh, guarding c4 in advance. Now moves like knight a5 and knight e5 would not put the c pawn in any danger, as it is supported by the b pawn. All right, now here, finally, Alireza, he does castle. Short castles is the move. There's no use of keeping that rook on h8 any longer. It's did its purpose, and now the king is in safety on the king side. All right, now here, Gukesh, rook c1, sliding his rook over, a perfectly fine choice. And now Alireza, he does the same, rook fd8, centralizing all of his pieces, but it turns out missing the chance to go d5 immediately. It turns out d5 immediately would be a very strong choice, as overall, white's development is a little bit clumsy. Again, he is missing that very important light squared bishop. His pawn structure on the king side is a little bit awkward, and overall, black is a little bit better centralized. Both his rooks are in excellent squares, and he's in a very good place to open up the center with the move d5. So d5 likely would have been the right choice instead of rook fd8. But of course, Alireza is going to have plenty of other chances to play that move in this game. All right, now, Gukesh, queen d2, a very obvious move, intending both rook fd1 and maybe bishop h6 later in the game. Now, again, d5 is likely the way forward here for Alireza, opening up the center when he is better centralized and has all of his pieces on excellent squares. But instead here, he does go king to h7. Okay, this move has its points. He is guarding h6 with the bishop and the king. Therefore, bishop h6 from white is not a playable move, as you would simply lose the bishop on h6 to bishop takes h6. So that is no good. Instead here, rook fd1 for Gukesh, and now it seems like both sides are sort of mirroring each other. Both sides have their queen on, d2/d7, the rook's on c8, d8/c1, d1, and so on. This is really anyone's game so far. All right, now here, Alireza, a6, gaining space on the queen side, stopping knight b5 ideas, and maybe even flirting with the idea of b5 later in the game. Of course, Gukesh is having none of that. He goes a4, clamping down on that b5 square immediately. Now b5 would not be a good idea at all. You simply lose a pawn on the spot. All right, now here, Alireza, once again, it is time for that break d5. D5. That is the strongest move here. Again, you simply need to open up the center. You do have that better dark squared bishop, and you would have an excellent game if you did that. But instead here, he trades on d4. Knight takes d4. All right, let's wait and see what he has in mind. Bishop takes d4 is the move. And now Alireza, bishop h6, hitting the queen on d2. But the problem with this move is actually, there's two problems. Number one, you can just drop the bishop back to e3, trading off those bishops, and overall, that is a good development for white. He does not want those dark squared bishops on the board. I mean, that dark squared bishop for black is guarding the king. If it gets removed, then black's king will be quite a bit more vulnerable. The other problem with this move is white doesn't even have to trade the bishops with bishop e3. Instead, the move e3 is also playable, gaining even more control over the center and bolstering that bishop on d4 for a very long time. Now, instead of e3, here, Gukesh, he played the more human-looking move. That is just bishop e3, dropping his bishop back, perfectly fine. Now we have bishop takes, and then queen to e6, offering the queen trade. Now, fortunately, Gukesh, he is one to keep the queens on the board at all costs. He knows he is a little bit better here after Alireza went astray with that bishop h6 idea, and now he does go queen d4, keeping the queens on the board. Of course, that e2 pawn being supported by the knight on c3. Therefore, queen takes e2 is not a possibility yet. All right, here, Alireza, how does he want to continue? I'm going to be a broken record here, but once again, d5 is the move you want to make, and you would be at least equal as black here. You're doing just fine. However, instead, he plays a kind of a shocking-looking move. Rook to g8, sliding his rook back over to the king side. The point being, obviously, even a beginner can spot this. He wants to go g5, opening up the king side, and, you know, that will be a kind of a risky decision, but the king on h7 is actually pretty well placed, and overall, shockingly, black is decently situated for that kind of break on the king side. All right, now here, Gukesh, he continues, queen to f4, sliding his queen over, gaining more control of that g5 square. He was worried about the g5 advance, but now, of course, g5 would lose a pawn on the spot to h takes g5, so that would be no good. All right, Alireza, rook c5, the rook lift on the 5th rank. Alireza is absolutely determined to get that g5 break in, and if he gets that, he will have decent attacking chances on the king side, so you can't count this guy out by any means. All right, e4 is the move for Gukesh, gaining space in the center, and now, sure enough, here comes the big whammy, g5, gaining space on the king side and blowing open the g-file. All right, h takes, then rook c takes g5, and now look at this, Alireza somehow, some way, you found a way to get an attacking game going on the king side with his 2 rooks lining up against that g3 pawn and the white king on g2 in general. All right, here, now, black, technically, black is threatening rook takes g3. You would win a pawn and the queen for those 2 rooks, and beyond that, you would have an ongoing attack, and that pawn on h5 would immediately be a pass pawn. And besides that, you do still have the queen and the knight, and everyone knows the queen and the knight synergize perfectly together. Those two pieces work together so incredibly well. So overall, rook takes g3, if black could get it in, would be incredibly dangerous for white. So with that in mind, knight to e2 is the move, sliding back that knight and supporting that square on g3. All right, now here, Alireza, the next step in his plan, he's got to find a better square for that knight. That knight on f6 isn't doing a whole lot for the attack yet. So with that in mind here, the move is knight d7, eyeing both the e5 square and maybe even f8, intending knight f8, then g6, hitting the queen, threatening ideas like h4 and so on. So the knight, a very good regrouping move. Now here, Gukesh, of course, he is not down by any means. He still has the advantage according to the engine. He just goes rook to h1, applying some pressure on the h-file and applying a lot of pressure on that pawn on h5. Now here, Alireza, according to the engine, you know what? It's a good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for black right here in this position. And while you're at it, go ahead and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this. All right, the key idea for black here is going to be the kind of shocking move f5. Again, you're opening up more and more lines on the king side of white takes. You can recapture with the queen or the rook and so on. And beyond that, you're just, again, trying to increase the pressure on the king side. So overall, f5 would be excellent. The computer says after f5, the best move for white is rook to h4. And then after knight f6, bringing the knight back into the game, but behind the f-pawn, you would have an excellent attacking position. Now, instead, in the game, knight c5 was played by black. An interesting choice. I did not see that one coming. I would have assumed, say, again, knight f8, intending ideas like knight g6 or knight e5 were the plan. But now on c5, the knight is threatening knight d3, hitting both the queen and the rook. That would be essentially game over on the spot, as black would be winning the exchange, that being the rook for the minor piece. So with that in mind here, white obviously has to guard that d3 square. So queen to e3, guarding d3 with the queen, not bad. And now queen g6. We have the triple battery on the g-file. Is this an Alekhines battery? I can't remember if Alekhines battery is the rook, the queen, the rook, or if it's the rook, then the queen. Someone in the comment section, let me know if this is an Alekhines battery or if it's the other way around with the queen behind everything. Either way, no matter what you want to call it, this is one strong attacking formation by black, lining up on the g-file. Of course, the threat is rook takes g3, knight takes, then queen takes, crashing in with the queen. So with that in mind here, white does go rook h3, defending that g3 pawn with the rook. But now here, Alireza e5, gaining more space in the center, opening up new attacking ideas. Now here, Gukesh, rook c to h1. He is trying to turn the tables on black. He is now attacking that h5 pawn twice. It is currently defended twice by the rook and the queen, but overall, this is getting spicy here. All right, knight e6, dropping back the knight, potentially eyeing both the the d4 and the f4 squares. Of course, f4 is currently not available, but that could be a dangerous square later in the game after, say, h4 and other stuff happening. Now here, king f2, sliding the king off the semi-open G file. Not a bad idea. And now here, Alireza, he gets a little bit trigger happy. The computer says you should be waiting a little bit longer to strike, but instead, he does go F5 immediately, again trying to open up more and more lines on the king side. But as you can see by the eval bar on the left side of your screen skyrocketing for white, it went from like, +1 pawn to +3.34 pawns. That means this move by F5 by black was a critical mistake. Now here, white has at least two very good moves. The strongest one is F4. The point being, you are trying to deflect the rook away from the defense of that pawn on the H5 square. For example, after F5, no matter what happens, that rook will have to move, say to G4, then you can take on H5. That is one of the problems with this F5 move. Now, instead, Gukesh plays a simpler move, not quite as strong, but still quite strong in general. E takes F5, trading off that pawn on F5 immediately. Now we have rook takes F5, then G4. Again, this move done with the same intentions as F4 earlier. The point being, you are trying to deflect the rook away from the defense of that pawn on the H5 square. And of course, the pawn on H5 is pinned to the king, and that means H takes G4 is not a possibility, as then the king is exposed to the attack by the rook on the H3 square. All right, now here, Alireza, this is a critical point in the game. He's got to find the right defensive move, and it turns out the only thing you can do is just give up that pawn on H5. With that in mind, the top stockfish move here is simply rook to F6, moving back with the rook and just giving up that pawn on H5 immediately. However, instead here, Alireza, he tries to hang on with all he's got. He goes rook G5, and this turns out to be a slightly inaccurate move. Here, white just takes on H5 anyway. Rook takes H5. Now, of course, if you take on H5 with a rook, then a rook takes again, puts the king under pressure. So with that in mind here, the king tries to hightail it out of there. King G7, but now Queen D2. Sliding back the queen is Gukesh, lining up the queen with that pawn on D6. All right, now here, Alireza, rook takes H5 is the move. Rook takes back is the move for Gukesh. And now we have rook D8, trying to defend that pawn on D6. Now, of course, Gukesh is up a single pawn, but the more important factor, of course, is the ongoing attack against the black king. Not to mention, one of those extra pawns being a pass pawn on G4, even in an endgame. For example, if we had a king and pawn endgame, that would be winning for Gukesh right here. So Alireza, no matter how you slice it, he is in deep trouble here. All right, knight G3, sliding over the knight. Then knight F4, jumping in with his own knight is Alireza, but now knight F5 hits the king. The king must move, and of course, this means that pawn on D6 is going to be a goner sooner or later. All right, king to F7 is the move, sliding out of the attack. Now rook to H6 hits the queen, the rook being supported by that knight on F5. Now we have queen to G5, sliding up with the queen. And now, of course, there are threats like knight to H3. With the discovered attack of the queen on the queen, that would win on the spot. So here, Gukesh, he has to get out of that potential attack, and he does with the move king to F1. Now, of course, there are no checks by the knight. For example, E2, D3, G2, and H3 would not put the king under check. Therefore, he is going to be safe for now. All right, Alireza, the move here is D5, a very combative idea. The point being, if you take that pawn, then say rook takes D5, will activate the rook. So with that in mind here, Gukesh, he ignores it and just slides the queen over. Queen to B4, targeting B7, targeting new weaknesses. Can Gukesh and Alireza even hold on here? Well, the strongest move here is not a fun move to make. It's not a move you want to make at all in this kind of position, but unfortunately, you do have to play the move B5 here if you want to hang on. Now, instead of that, he goes knight to E6, dropping back with the knight, but here's where Gukesh just plays a series of beautiful checks, one by one, just increasing the pressure. As you can see by the eval bar, the computer says this is a mate in 13. And can Gukesh find the literal mate in 13? Here we go. Queen takes B7, the obvious move, winning that pawn on B7 and hitting the king on the F7 square. Now, king G8. Now we have queen to H7, sliding the queen over. King to F8. Now queen H8, hitting the king once again, and once again the king must move. So king to F7 is the move. Now rook to H7. Now both the 7th and the 8th ranks are cut off. You gotta move your king to G6 or block the check. In the game, king G6 is the move, but now we have rook G7, forcing the move king to F6, and that's about it in this position. All right, so king to F6. Now we have rook G8, sliding back the rook, and we have the discovered attack of the queen on the king. Now here, Alireza, he goes knight g7, trying to block the attack, but here in this position, he simply resigns to Gukesh D. The point being, after, say, queen takes g7, you're going to be up an entire piece. There's just no coming back from that. For example, queen takes g7, queen takes, then rook takes. Here, white is literally up an entire knight. Everything is defended. And for that reason, way back here in this position, despite being, white's turn to move, Alireza, he jumps the gun and he resigns on the spot to the new world champion, Gukesh D. Wow, what a game between Gukesh D and Alireza Firouzja in the 2024 Superbet United Blitz Tournament. I hope I said that right. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button for me and comment down below what you liked or didn't like about the video. I'd love to hear from you. And while you're at it, check out this video right here, where I cover a beautiful game by Gukesh against the GOAT Magnus Carlsen. If you want to see the world champion and the greatest chess player of all time duke it out in a crazy game, check that video out. And I'll see you in the next video.